this saying, like, get to the part that is meaningful, get to the part that matters, right?
Mhm.
Like when you get to that, it's going to help guide you through the mess that you're about to adventure into. Especially if you're doing something really big and bold and new and genuinely creative in the world. Like no one's ever been there. So how do you even know the way?
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
All right. Podcast time. Welcome to Way of the Artist. This is Brandon and Evan. And we're talking about something that I think is going to be interesting, as I always do. Get to the part that has meaning. Actually, I'm going to pass this off to Evan pretty quickly because this was something that he shared. And I think it was a really good idea, but I think it relates to everything in art and everything really in life and in business as well. I'm seeing so many parallels with this. But get to the part that has meaning is such an important idea, and I can't wait to get into it. I have a lot to say. I don't really know where it's going to lead for sure, but I do have opinions. I'm going to say that. I don't know if I'm right on every one of them, but I'm hoping to have a few discoveries as well. But Evan, before I pass this off, there was something, maybe you can say it's about threading the needle. Don't waste time threading the needle. Get to the part that has meaning. I think that was it. Can you kind of elaborate on this idea?
Yeah. I'll try and wrap that all up as quickly as possible. So, it was something that I say to my students, my acting students, and because it was something that my teacher shared to us, and it was, it had to do with something very specifically that we were doing in our acting classes and these exercises that we were doing. And he would say, don't waste time threading the needle, which was, essentially don't waste time, for us as an audience, like where we would literally, somebody might be sewing something on stage in front of us and having them, having to sit and watch them literally thread a needle before they could start sewing. And it was like, well, what's the meaningful part of this exercise, right? And the meaningful part was the sewing part. That's really what's important. So get to it. Make sure that you can just get to it, once you start doing this exercise in front of all of us, right? But there's, as you were alluding to, I think that there was this part, get to the part that has meaning. Don't waste time threading the needle. Like get to the thing, and and actually it's funny that we ended up calling this episode what we did, and you kind of jumped on sort of the story that I shared with you, because it was what you were sharing with me that made me think of this whole thing. You were talking about working on a script or something like that, and you can, or anything, it's you can waste all of this time on, or you can spend, I won't say waste, but you can spend a lot of time on some trivial little detail, with whatever it is that you're working on. And it's not the part that has the real meaning. It's not the part that has the substance. It's not the thing that's the most important. And I think that we might need to also add another element to this title. It's like, get to the part that has meaning to you, right? Like not just the part that has meaning, but that has meaning to you, because we can give meaning to anything and everything. Like there's this great quote from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is that, and I will kind of paraphrase this one as well, but he said something to the effect of, the world, despite what many philosophers and people have said about it, the world is not meaningless. That's not the problem. The problem that we have as human beings is that the world is unconditionally meaningful, that it becomes so difficult to be able to even understand that or wrap our heads around that in any sort of expressible way. Was sort of what he was. I didn't I didn't describe that particularly well, but I hope everyone gets the point of it. But so anyhow, the part that has meaning to you, I think any artist and anyone, who wants to lead a life that is meaningful for them, I mean, then that's always got to be sort of your North Star to a degree. It's like it can't be about getting hung up on all the details. And I'm kind of going off and I might be jumping around in a bunch of different things, but I this just popped into my head, so I'm going to run with it. I just finished watching this documentary that went up on Netflix called Trainwreck. It's like the story of Woodstock 1999, where there was like riots and it was just like the whole thing went to shit. And it's certainly there's the filmmakers, the documentarians who made it. They have their own sort of narrative and leaning towards it, but from the outset of this documentary, it seemed pretty clear in my eyes, the way that they were showing it, like where this immediately went off the rails. And where it immediately went off the rails is that it was about making money. Woodstock 1999 was not about it was not really about bringing the peace and love feeling, that, to the world that the original Woodstock was about, which was peace, love, and great music, right? And, to the original Woodstock's credit, that was kind of an accident, how it all happened. Like, nobody thought it was going to turn into the thing that it was. It just did. But it turned into what it was, I would argue, because of where it started out from, where the meaning of this event was. And then Woodstock 99, it was very clear that this was about making money. And all the decisions that went into it were about making money. And then they kind of covered it in this veneer of saying like, oh, Woodstock, peace and love. And it's just like, no, nothing about this event says that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that was, I would argue in terms of this conversation, they didn't get to the part that has meaning. All right. Or, I mean, the place where they put the meaning created this sort of situation. Right. And I think that's, for us as individuals and artists, that's something very important for us to keep in mind, because it can be so easy to get sidetracked and makes like, oh, I've got to make this script like this so that it's more, it's more, I got to make it more commercial, or I've got to compromise on this and that. And that's not to say that there might not be certain opportunities to do that, and that's not an okay thing. And sometimes, but it's like, what did you lose the meaning in that whole process? Like, I think that's where we really get into trouble, with the things that we take on, is when we completely lose sight of what the meaning, and I will use another word here for meaning, but the soul. When we lose the soul of what it is what we're doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so many good things about what you said, and where to pick up is kind of the question. Let me start with this Woodstock thing, because it was the last thing you were talking about, and maybe I can hit on some of the earlier things. With the Woodstock Trainwreck documentary, I'm not sure if I've seen that particular documentary about Woodstock 99, but I have seen a documentary about it. And I understand and I'm aware of a lot of the details about this particular festival and what happened and how it went terribly wrong. And it just became literally chaos and destruction. And I think that when you set out to do something, there is an initial interest, there's an initial point or purpose or meaning. And you mentioned something about the North Star. And this is something I've been talking with my clients a lot about, is like the North Star is a great analogy for kind of thinking about, okay, this is kind of keeping me where I'm directed. But one thing I want to kind of point out is that I think sometimes when we think of the North Star, we think of it like, I have this place I'm going, like this direction. And it's like, you got to look at your path as something where it's probably not going to be like a straight path from where you are to where you want to go. It's going to be this windy, wiggly traversal of ups and downs and lefts and rights. And sometimes you're going to be in a place where it's so dark and unclear that you can't even see where the North Star is anymore, and you don't even know where you are. And part of, that will be, do I stay where I am or do I try and move? And if I move, do I even get more lost? And you're going to go through all of that. And that's part of the artist journey. And it's part of the journey of anybody who's trying to create a vision or a dream or an artistic piece. So I think when you take on a festival, particularly a music festival with that many people and that many musicians, it could very well be that you get lost along the way. You start to lose track of, why are we doing this in the first place? I think when you come into something without a certain kind of genuine, authentic care of interest and something that you're trying to build in the world that's not just what you're trying to get, I think you will inevitably always get lost, because the journey to anything great requires you get lost at some point. I actually think that's a part of the journey. I think that's a part of the process. And so if you never had a guide to begin with, when you get lost and you get spun around, you won't even know where to go anymore, because you never had a place to go in the first place. And so with that particular festival, if people want to investigate that and look more into it, you can see this quite literally happening over the course of the festival. You can see people literally, things are going sideways and there is no course correction. There is just let it go. And there's such little care about how the people who are there, how they're experiencing it. It was like, we got your money, you're here now, so deal with it. It was kind of that, and what's that gonna do? You know what I mean? What's that gonna create? And if you watch the documentary, which it sounds like we're really marketing it, you'll see what happens. This is literally what happens. And that's a large example of what happens with your project, your artistic medium, or your business. It will basically burn down in flames. And that is ultimately what's going to happen. Right. So that in mind, I think as we're talking about this, if you can always have something to touch back onto, like, why are we doing this in the first place? What's the point? You will find that you can measure that against the obstacles or challenges that you face throughout.
Yeah.
Now, just to kind of bring it back a little bit more specifically, you talked about this, get to the part that matters, don't waste time threading the needle. Well, if this shirt, for example, that you got to stitch or whatever you're stitching, if that's important, because, I think you mentioned something, I'm not sure if this is on the podcast or before, but it's for your brother and your brother loaned it to you and you messed it up and you got to fix it before he gets there in an hour. And, and that's important. And then in the same time, you're dealing with somebody in the scene and maybe it's your partner and they want to break up with you. Right. And that's important to you, but also your relationship with your brother is important or whatever. And so now you're caught between these two places of meaning, and it becomes a matter of navigating that North Star, because this is what inevitably pulls us off path. We think, oh yeah, I'll just make the right choice. No, the choice is going to be a dilemma. It's going to be a challenging choice where it's like, if I go this way, these consequences. If I go that way, those consequences. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something to kind of keep in mind. Meaning helps you figure out which consequences you're willing to live with. And that happens for everything. So if you don't know what matters to you, if you don't know what's meaningful, the consequences are going to happen regardless. There's always consequences. There's always damages. But you might have to live with some bad ones, and you won't even have done it for great purpose or meaning. And that's a shame,
Yeah. And you bring up a really great point in this whole conversation, which is like, you have to know what has meaning to you, what has real meaning to you. And I'm going to say something and running the risk of sounding like some sort of idealistic, preachy person. I'm not meaning to come off this way, but to me, this is a fact of life. The meaning has to be more than money.
Mm-hmm.
And I promise you that money is a superficial expression of something that has meaning to you, right? And I want to make, because I want to also make something very, very clear, in terms of, partially that the comment about, like the Woodstock Festival as the example, which is, I don't have a problem with people making money. I have no issue with people make money. Please make money. You need to make money. That's not the issue. The problem is that was the main thing. It can't be the main thing, because money is not really a meaningful thing in and of itself. So it can't be that. It can be a byproduct of doing something that truly, genuinely has meaning. And I think that is, I mean, it doesn't have to be, like it technically does not have to be, but as far as who I think our audience is, and in terms of what we are advocates for in terms of having a meaningful life, then, if you make it all about money, as Alan Watts would say, you'll end up wasting your entire life, because you'll end up doing a bunch of stuff that you don't want to do to make money, so that you can go on doing a bunch of things that you don't like doing to make money. Like that's the pattern of that being your North Star. It's a kind of insanity when you think about it. So, but yeah, it's got to have the part that has meaning. It has to be something other. It has to be something that and as you're saying, like, you have to know what it is. And sometimes that is, that can be kind of a tricky thing to start figuring out.
Mm-hmm. I think something else that comes up is like, there's a balance between what you get and what you provide and what you give. And I do think that there are ends of a spectrum where if you're too much on one side, it's a problem. There needs to be a balance between you getting and you giving. If it's all you give or all you get, I think that you start to run into really bad territory, because the person that obviously it's all about what they get. I want to make money. I want to be rich. I want to do that. That's very self-serving and very selfish in a negative kind of toxic way. But the person is like, I just want to save the world. I want to give, the sacrifice of myself and everything that I am and is in my life and my circle. Well, you render yourself useless, and you can't actually help anybody if you don't actually take care of yourself, because no one asked you. And if they are, they're not really good for you, but no one asked you to die for them. You know what I mean? You got to decide what to die for. And you got to decide that's meaningful to you. You know what I mean? And like, for example, if you go to the idea of a soldier or somebody that's fighting for something, and this is hard for some people to wrap their mind around, but there are certain things that you will gladly die for when you find enough meaning. There are certain things that you would not give up. And this is where a lot of principle comes from. This is where a lot of like integrity comes from, because there needs to be a certain part of you that there are things that are more important than your comfort and your immediate gratification that you get out of the knowledge that they exist beyond your existence. And that is self-serving in a way. And that's a kind of giving where it's quite profound. But when you're giving because you're just a doormat and you're just getting walked on and you just think, oh, hey, like everybody needs help except me. then you have a problem. You have like a literal problem because you need help. If you see that other people need help, you need that help. Because how do you see it in other people? It all begins with you. It's all a projection. And I know that some people, maybe psychologically you have not crossed that bridge to understand that that's so, but everything really is just a mirror of you. And so your meaning internally actually is very helpful to the outside world, because when you see meaning out here, you find meaning in yourself. And and when you think lack out here, you actually see lack in yourself. And so there's that saying, at first I was foolish and tried to save the world. I'm paraphrasing, something like this. At first I was foolish and tried to save the world, and then I became wise and went to save myself. Basically, or change myself. Yeah, I tried to change the world, and then I went to change myself. It's all the same, take the word, change it, whatever. But like through ourselves, we actually do most of the things we want to do in the world. And when we have a very vacant thing that we're doing with ourselves, we end up with very vacant results in the external world, because it's just a mirror of vacancy, right? It's a mirror of emptiness. And so, I think that, there's countless art projects you can point to. There's countless businesses that have failed because of this reason. There's obviously festivals that have, gone astray or not gone well. There's all sorts of things. But I think it's like, this saying, like, get to the part that is meaningful, get to the part that matters, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you get to that, it's going to help guide you through the mess that you're about to adventure into. Especially if you're doing something really big and bold and new and genuinely creative in the world. Like no one's ever been there. So how do you even know the way? You're going to have to, if you were walking through bushes, there's going to be bushes, and you're going to have to figure out like what to cut, like, and what way to go. And then you might do all this work, and then you just end up at like a big wall, and you have to turn around and go back and do it again. And, you need to kind of know like where you're going, so that when you run into problems, you have an answer on how to deal with them. Right. And that's going to come from your meaning and your purpose and your, which also, by the way, I'll say one last thing on that. It might not be that strong in the beginning or that clear in the beginning. It might become clearer and stronger as you go on, but there is something initially. So keep trying to come back to that thing, that core interest or curiosity or whatever that might be. Come back to that, because there was something in that. That was the seed of all of this. And if you abandon that seed, really, there's no point. You're going to get lost and you're going to be into something else, right? But there was a seed of something in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, like the why that exercise, which I wish I could point somebody to one of the episodes where I walk through it, but it's kind of like that. And what I love about that is just it starts off at a place of like, oh yeah, this is what I want. This is what I want, my life to look like, and this is why I want it. And then it's just like, but then when you keep asking, okay, but why that? Why that? Why that? Why that? And you start to figure out what that whole thing is really all about. And and like just in terms of one of the things that, at a certain point with my students and with people who have studied, Meisner before, is that, like that's like discovering what has meaning to you is something that we spend we're really thorough with, right? Like, how do you even really work with yourself? How do you really understand what's truly, genuinely important to you as a human being, right? And it takes time. It's like over and over and over again, students coming up, doing a new scene, and now with a whole new personal circumstance, a whole new thing that they have created from their imaginations, but using elements of their real life to really understand, sort of what you would die for, like among many other things. But that level of sincerity and intensity to what's actually true about you, right? What would you die for? What would you give up everything for? What would make you completely just walk away from something or someone or whatever? Like, this is, it's part of the fun of acting, and a lot of artistry is you dive into these things and begin to understand, or just at least touch a small part of it. And what's interesting that I found, not only through my own experience of going through that process, but also watching many, many others go through that process, is that what genuinely has meaning for people most of the time, I would say at least 90% of the time, is it's people. It's always other people. It's like, okay, so what is this like why are you doing this? What's driving you in this scene? Oh, well, my mom, my partner, my kid, it's fascinating. It's fascinating that, like, where our meanings really actually end up coming down to. And sometimes it's a cause, right? Sometimes it's but even then, it's like, okay, but what's the cause about? The cause is about people. Right? Like, it's people who are not you, but are kind of like you, and I think that, again, this is the question of art, and and there is a way of, whether you're an artist or not, in injecting artfulness into your life. Like, this, like, art is just is not just art is not just some sort of an imitation or a copy of life. Art is something that is deeply connected to life, and life is something that is deeply connected to art. If you choose to see it that way, you will see it everywhere. I mean, shit, this is how this podcast is still going, is because it's everywhere and it's in everything, and it's accessible to us at every moment, to bring that quality to our lives. But it's really about those, art is really about these meanings, these meanings that connect us and unite us and remind us of that thing. So, which is why I think art is so important, because it is one of its functions, in addition to connection, but it's one of those things that continually points to what is meaningful.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think as it points to it, it often gives people a connection to what's meaningful that maybe they didn't always notice, or maybe they felt alone in, this type of thing. There's a story, Tony Robbins shares about this, where he talks about how, like, there was a Thanksgiving dinner where they couldn't put food on the table. And he never wanted people to experience that, because that was so hard for him. So I think he's done something like, I think it's over 1 million, at least over 100,000, but I think it's millions even. But he's put millions or hundreds of thousands of Thanksgiving dinners on people's tables who couldn't afford to have Thanksgiving dinner because of that experience that he had, And, if the guy never did anything else in his life other than that, I mean, what a great contribution, what a wonderful thing to try to do, to try to help people not have to experience that, what obviously must have been a very painful and uncomfortable moment in his life. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're finding meaning, a lot of the stuff that you will find meaningful comes from something that you experience, something that maybe only you understand, and for people who have always had a Thanksgiving dinner and they just take it for granted. They don't even notice it, right? To them, that might not be something that's really going to stand out to them. And the thing is like, that's fine, but maybe there's something else that stands out to you. And it isn't always like that either. I mean, one thing I wanted to point to was like, if you're running a business too, you know, get to the part that has meaning is also valuable on just a practical level. Like, a lot of people, they say, oh, I have this business, and it's like, what do you do? I'm like, or what do you do to like build it? It's like, well, I'm on social media, I'm on Facebook, and I'm on these groups, and I'm doing whatever. And it's like, is that like doing anything? Well, I have all these followers. Is that meaningful? Does that matter? Because like, if these followers aren't becoming leads, and they aren't being converted into sales, and they aren't becoming new clients or new customers, then it doesn't really matter, does it? You know what I mean? So let's get to the part that actually matters. Let's get to the part that's actually meaningful for what you're trying to do. Now, that's just in the context of building a business. And to build a business, part of building a business is to make money, right? It is, that's what business is, right? We're doing business, right? We're exchanging. It is to make exchange. Now, if you're not making exchange, you're not really doing business. And, I think that when you're looking at anything you're trying to do, I was talking with a writer the other day, and the writer was, well, I have this 5-year plan, and, I don't want to be here in the next 5 years, and I haven't, done anything. Well, what's the number one metric? Right. You can talk all day about this technique and this tool you learned and that thing you learned and whatever. And like, you can work it all out. But what matters is that you actually write stuff down in a story format, in a screenplay, in a script, because you say you want to be a screenwriter or a professional script writer, or whatever you want to call it. Well, I'll tell you one thing, they write. That's the difference between a novelist and somebody who's not a novelist. The novelist actually writes novels. You know what I mean? And so, what's the actual thing that matters? What's actually meaningful? You know what I mean? And so one of the things that I always say is like, let's just get to the thing. Let's just get to the thing, and then let's work out the rest of the stuff later. And yeah, you're going to make an ass of yourself. You're going to stumble. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do it wrong, but you're going to actually be doing it. One last thing I'll share on that. I was dating this girl, and she started a business. And this was just before I started my business. And she had some really good marketing. She had really good idea. And she, and she went out, and then she just started like, she did an event, she made a little bit, and then she just started going like, I'm just going to learn. And I was like, I always want to start a business. And I'm like, now is as good a time as ever. And I started my business. And the first thing I went and did was I just started talking to people and selling. And I made a massive amount of money really quickly. And I started a business. And since then, my business has been my main form of income since then. And I remember she got kind of jealous, and she was like, because she started her business first. And it was like, the only thing that matters is that you either sell your product, or you get your new clients to do your service, or whatever your business is, right? That's the only thing that matters. So get to the part that matters, because people will spend all sorts of time like working on their website, doing their social media, doing all this stuff. Like, and this isn't just for business, because I want to parlay this back into artistry. If you're an actor, you got to get out and do auditions, or you got to start finding scripts, or sourcing scripts, or meeting directors, or, connect. You got to start doing the things that actually matter, because you can sit all day in acting class and talk about how you're working on your acting career. And I'm not saying that's not valuable and it's not important, but it's also not what really matters if you want career success. And so I think that it's an important thing to keep in mind. You don't want to necessarily make it about money and career success. I think that is, we pointed that out. But if you do want to get something, you've got to look at the metrics that actually matter, and, the metrics that mean something, right? And I think this works on an interpersonal level, a personal level, and a practical level. And I think they're all worth mentioning as we navigate this conversation, because, like you said, we're not against people making money. Go ahead and make money. It's just that maybe it will be better if you make the money with a deeper meaning than just making money, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe. And because, yeah, like in the instance of like the example you gave of, you know, like, yeah, like the acting class is an important part, but it's not the only part. An acting class can become a bit of a rut. It can become a bit of a crutch. And I've seen that happen. Where it's like, you know, maybe you should spend, you know, these hundreds of dollars that you're spending every month, you know, on classes, you know, that you've been doing for the last couple of years. What if you put like 6 months of that money aside and you made a film with it? You know, like what if you did that? You know, like there's so many facets to it, and I said, like, you know, meeting other people, meeting other filmmakers and things like that, and you know, again, sometimes, like, yeah, the byproduct can be, oh, okay, you're getting more parts and so you're making more money, but the thing is, like, but are you doing it to make more money? No, not necessarily. You're doing it because you get to act more.
Yeah.
Right? You get to actually do your thing more, and the byproduct is that you're making some money about it. But it's when there's that flip where suddenly it's just like, oh, I'm going to make this much money on doing this, right? And that becomes the main thing. That's when I think it gets into a little bit of trouble. And, you know, you see that in actors on occasion, and some actors are actually very honest about it. You know, they say, like, oh, I did this one for the paycheck. Right. And the thing is that I would argue that you can usually tell. You can usually tell when an actor's doing it for the paycheck, where it's like, oh, I can't believe that they got this person to do this movie, right? Like some really phenomenal actor, and, you know, they do a fine job, but it's just like, this isn't a passion project, you know, like this is for the paycheck. So,
can I say something before
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I just want to talk about that with classes and stuff and training. I think that from an acting point of view, there's the actor that's trying to train so they can get a part. And then there's the actor that's getting parts that's trying to train so they can do those parts better. And I think most actors actually want to be the latter. I don't think they want to be the former. So when you're acting, I'm not saying don't train, but it's like, are you training with the perspective of, I hope one day I get a part and someone notices me? That's one way to do it. But another way to do it is, like, I'm making my own film and I want to do a fucking great job. So let me find the best acting coach that I can find that's going to help train me and help me to get the most out of myself. So when I do the work that I want to do, then I'm doing it at that caliber. And, like, this is what I'm saying. It's like mindset is such an important element in all of this, right? Because, you know, and maybe this branches into it. I'll just say this, Evan, I'm going to leave it with you. Something that's coming up for me is like the scarcity abundance mindset. When I use that actor analogy there, for example, the actor that's trying to get a part versus the actor that's trying to do better at the parts they actually are already doing, there's a difference in mindset. One's scarcity and the other's abundance, right? The other one's just like, I'm already getting the parts. I want to know how to do those parts better, right? And that's really, like, that's a much better place to be in, because the other one is just like desperate. You know what I mean? Whereas this one, they have something they're trying to build on top of something, and they have something to inform themselves with. Yeah, so let me pass it on to you, because I have some more things to say on that, but I'm gonna just hold off. But you know, I think, like, mindset is an important part in this too, right? It's like, you know, like, you want to do a business. Look, I've done a business, and I've made enough money so then I could just, you know, go around. I was hanging out in New York, walking around Manhattan for like weeks, just eating nice food, having drinks, talking with people, just doing business on my phone as I walk down, you know, like through Times Square, and that was amazing. But I've also had times where I couldn't even afford to pay for the power in my house, and I had to take an extension cord and put it into the hallway of my apartment building so that I get some power into my house to actually cook a meal. And that's how bad it got at one point. So I've seen both sides of the spectrum. And, one thing is, you gotta, you might go through hard times, you might not. And people don't always talk about this with business, and they don't always talk about this with art. You can parallel this to acting or screenwriting or filmmaking or anything. You might have you might be winning an award one day, booking some big role, making a lot of money, and then another day you can't even get a part for the life of you, and no one wants to see you. And in those times, it's going to be kind of interesting. It's going to be kind of challenging, right? And you need to find a North Star. You need to find a place that makes this worth pushing through, And for me, I'll just share something. For me, it was always freedom and autonomy are such high values to me. And I really want that for everybody. I want them to have freedom and autonomy to do the things they actually want to do. If you were to sum me up in a sentence, that would be it. I want you to have the freedom and autonomy to do the things you actually want to do. And that summarizes everything. I do not want you to work a job you hate that's taking you away from what you don't actually want to do. I want you to have freedom from that. I want you to have the autonomy to decide who to work with. I don't want you to have to work with someone you don't want to work with. And if I can help anybody do that, that is my number one goal in this life, because I want that for myself. You see how it all comes back? It's just a reflection of me. And so if I can share that with people, that's everything I do. And so it happens to be through filmmaking or screenwriting or some medium like that. It still comes back down to the same point. I don't care if you want to write scripts, make movies, or build a house. What I want you to do is do what you want to do. And I want you to have all the freedom you need to do it. And I want you to have autonomy to choose who you do it with, when you do it, where you do it. Everything. I don't want anyone to have to tell you how or with whom you have to do it. And that's what I want for myself, and that's what I want for everyone else. That's my North Star. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. No matter how lost I get, when I couldn't even fucking get power into my place to cook a meal, and that was embarrassing. But I just was hanging on to this idea that you want freedom and autonomy to do what you love. And this will pass. I will find a way through this. You know what I mean? And when you're in those moments, man, you question every choice you've ever made. I can tell you that. You go, have I fucked up my life? Have I made a huge mistake? You know what I mean? And in those moments when you're asking those kind of questions, it's really good to have a North Star. It's really good to have something that is helping you push through those dark clouds. But, I guess let me bring it right back down. Scarcity mindset, abundance mindset. Scarcity mind says, I'm broke, I fucked up my life, and I've made a huge mistake. Abundance mindset says, this is a passing storm. This is a valley we walk through on our way to the mountain we're going to climb. And someone else out there is experiencing this or will experience this, and you're going to be the perfect coach for them because you'll know just what it's like. That's abundancy mindset, right? Abundancy mindset takes it as a gift, as an experience, as an opportunity, right? It doesn't give in to shame and guilt and depression, right? But those clouds will come, they will come at times like that, right? So
yeah, it's I mean, anything that I think I would have had to say on the thing, I think you've already covered it, which is essentially that, yeah, it's like, I think that a trap of that whole abundance and scarcity mindset, I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with that language. It's been around for a fair while now. And there's this whole thing of where, again, it's like, that's very often that gets caught up and attributed to, oh, like, you're in an abundancy mindset, so you're living in a fucking mansion and your yachts, like you got your own private dock and a yacht and all this, it's like, that's because you have an abundant, to an extent perhaps, but it's like, what good is an abundancy mindset if it's not there for you when those times are tough. And that's where I think the meaning element comes into it. As long as you have that meaning and you're connected to it, and it doesn't mean that you have a crisis of faith in it sometimes every now and then. I think that that's important. A crisis in faith can remind you, can help you go deeper into what does have meaning for you. And again, that's part of that abundance mindset. Is it's like that abundance sort of mindset also incorporates that willingness to learn, that willingness to be open to something new coming in that you didn't know before, which again is part of an artist mindset. Like the master artist is open, because as we discussed in our last podcast, when you enter into the wonderness, into that wild thing. And as you said earlier in this podcast, getting lost is part of it. Like that's, you expect you're going to get lost, in any new sort of project, any new undertaking, that there's going to be some point where you're not totally sure where you are. And that's, you want that, right? And so it's all of those kinds, these little things that create that are a part of that abundance mindset. It's not just simply caught up in a material thing. It's a well-being thing. It's a how do you expand into everything that to anything that happens to you in your life, whether you would consider that a good or an evil, so to speak, right? It's because, it's like, if it's only good when times are good, then it's shit.
Really,
your abundance mindset is shit. That's actually like that you're starting to head towards more in that lacking mindset. So you sort of covered. So I guess I just sort of fleshed out my own ideas on that one. But
well, I had a discovery while you were talking, and I actually think that this whole abundance mindset and scarcity mindset has a lot to do with how full you are of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, like scarcity mindset is really just you lack meaning. That's really where scarcity is, because when you have enough meaning, you can really be anywhere. And you can, and I know this through personal experience. If I have enough meaning and enough connection and enough of a tie to whatever it is I'm after, I can walk through hell and back. I mean, I can find my way through the hardest times. And the abundance, I think, is this sense of that there's something greater than this moment I'm in. And I think that's a really important part of that whole idea, right? And so maybe, as a suggestion, I might say, if you're going through a hard time, you're feeling depressed, or you're feeling like lack in your life right now, double down on what's meaningful. Like try to just figure out what's meaningful. Because I know for myself, when I was in a state of depression where I went through that period, I kept saying, what's the point? That's what I kept saying over and over and over. What's the fucking point? What's the point? Right? That was so hard. And once I passed through that and I found a point, the depression just starts to go away. It's like, it's a distant memory, but I do remember what it was like when I literally was like, what is the fucking point? And it was so hard. But I think most people, I've heard that depression is what's the point. That's actually where depression exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But depression is also can be, again, an incredible teacher.
Totally.
When you can sort of expand into it. There's I won't try and get into it, but there's a fantastic book called Care of the Soul by Thomas More, and there's a fascinating chapter in it that's called The Gifts of Depression. But anyhow, there's this meaning connection to this interesting territory that we've stepped into with mindset, because when you have that meaning, when you're connected to that thing, like I know as being someone who, like you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur as well. Like, I teach, I run my own school, and I know when starting that out, it's a scary thing. And I'm like, well, nobody, really knows me as a teacher in town, and and there's all of these other established schools that people already know about. Like, how am I even going to do this? Right. And the thing is I think that there's also, it seems kind of like it doesn't go together, but I think there's something about humility that is also, and humility is is a part of the abundance mindset, because humility accepts what is wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It accepts the moment as it is. And for myself, it was, it's moments of being like, oh, I've only got 2 people in this class, right? And sometimes there's that little battle that goes on where it's just like, oh, there's only 2 people in this class, and my mind's getting occupied on threading the needle, right, with all of this shit. And it's just like, no, you have 2 people in this class. Give them what you've got,
mm-hmm.
right? Because the shit that you've got is something that you believe in. The shit that you've got is something that has real meaning to you, and that's the focus. And as soon as that becomes the center of attention, the center of focus again, I don't have a problem anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And over time, the school from its early days, or the first workshop that I did that had 2 people in it, it's just like that was some years ago. Now I've consistently got, classes with lots more people in it, but it's like, it's one of those things where I still come back to it, where I check in on, like any sort of disappointment I might feel about something, and realizing that it's all a bunch of nonsense. It's like, it's me not putting the part that's meaningful at, like, as a thing that's it's me forgetting, and I think that's part of the frustration of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's this weird forgetfulness, it's like we're, which is, I understand we're constantly inundated, like our lives are just inundated with sort of this, like, images and messaging, conditioning, I dare even say propaganda, on what your life is supposed to look like, right? How much money you're supposed to make, what house you're supposed to be in, what car you're supposed to be in, what clothes you're supposed to wear, what phone you're supposed to have, like what TV you're supposed to have in your living room, what, all of this stuff, all of this shit. And none of that stuff is the stuff that's meaningful, but we're constantly inundated with that stuff. So it's like we're constantly having this reinforcement. And I'm like, no, this is what's important. This is what's important. Right. And the sneaky thing about advertising and marketing that we get in sort of consumerism, I might be going off on a bit of a tangent on this one, but the sneaky thing is that it plays into your meanings. It plays into your meanings as if it's gonna satisfy it, right? Buy this car because in this car you and your family will go and make memories and spend time together and all that stuff. Because it's like what has genuine meaning to you is for many people is their families and spending time with their families. So what do? Oh, well, we sell you a fucking car. And we show you a whole commercial of this family out doing this fucking thing together, right? It's the same thing. It's like, you can sell a TV to somebody. Oh, the family's all sitting around on the couch together. Oh, it's a smart TV. Oh, it's so great. We can pick our favorite things together. Hey, it's all great, but it's just like, it's just a TV, right? It's like, it's like a bullshit substitution for the real thing, right? It's a cardboard cutout of a meaning. So that's my rant. That's my rant, I guess, Brandon. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. Well, man, I mean, look, we started out. I mean, I explicitly said I had opinions. Clearly, you have some too, and that's all right. I think it's all right. To have um to have certain things where you're like, okay, like this material item is really, really important to me, and I'm really attached to it, and like, I get that, and I think if you kind of like maybe look into like why do you care about it? What do you really after? You know what I mean? Um, there is a power and a freedom that comes with detachment, and I think what you're talking about is detachment, because as you do detach from needing things in the material world to be okay, to be happy, to be satisfied, you actually not only create freedom, but you actually create um, fulfilled opportunity for yourself. So I get the inclination to implore that. At the same time, I mean, there's certain things I know, like I get caught in it. Like there's certain things that I have, like some material items, and I'm like, oh man, I really like this is really really important to me, and and it's just like, well, you know, like there's a whole relationship there, and you can get caught into it. And if it's like sentimental, then maybe it's because, oh, someone gave it to me and blah blah blah. Or if it's something that you just spent a lot of money, like what's meaningful to me is like, I worked for this. This took time and effort and energy for me to acquire and to get.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times where I thought about it, and I wanted it, and I pushed for this, and I achieved it, and so really part of your relationship to that material thing is that. And I think it's important to recognize that the material item is often just a representation of something that's actually more meaningful if you are willing to dig deeper and try to understand that. I had a weird period in my life, particularly when I was going through my depressed period, where I was very attached to my things, and I was also going through a financial hardship. But I used to think, oh, well, these things, like they're worth something. Like I don't want to just get rid of them because I might need to sell them, or I need to do something. And I had all these weird relationships to things. I was keeping things around me and going through the state, or not just state, but stage of detachment was a very challenging stage. And I don't have time to like kind of really get into what that was and what that took. But freeing myself of these things really actually helped me a lot, because when I was attached to these things, I had a scarcity mindset. I need these things. Like I don't even care. I don't even like the thing. I might need to sell it, was kind of a lot of my justification for keeping things around or whatever, or it's valuable and I just shouldn't throw something out that's valuable or get rid of something that's valuable. Or I had this thought that would play in my head. What if I regret it? What if I get rid of it and then I regret it, Um, and so when you work through those thoughts, or at least when I worked through those thoughts, I actually started to find that I was free of the attachment to scarcity. You know what I mean? That like I'm nothing without this thing is really what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, like, I mean, being where I am now, you think about some of the things you hung on to, especially when you can earn, and you're like, well, why did I ever care about that extra fork? Like just to kind of make it the most ridiculous example ever. Like, why did I care about this little thing that's actually quite worthless? You know what I mean? Because really, the ability to produce value was in me, not in the things that were around me. You know what I mean? I'm the one that brought those things into my life. I am the value that brought that in. Those things are a representation of my value. They are not a representation of my value. And that was a big transformation, right? So I mean, I think before we kind of start wrapping this up, I'll just say that, when you're looking at, like, get to the part that's meaningful, that matters, get to you, right? Because you are what matter, right? You're the thing that's meaningful. You're the thing that actually matters in this whole scenario, because you're the one experiencing it, you're the one living it. And that thing, that TV, that isn't living it. You're living it, and I get it. You're the one that worked for the TV. You're the one that got the TV. You're the one that got gifted the TV, whatever it is. But you are the one that has the TV. The TV doesn't have you, and I think when you talk about materialism, I think that's kind of the main one of the main points, at least, that we're looking at,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I mean, man, like you can go down a rabbit hole with that one,
Oh
but
yeah.
why don't we talk about beer and then
Yeah.
maybe we'll wrap some things up unless you got something else to say before we
No,
do
no,
it.
no, no. That's. I think that's we've kicked on that one long enough. So, I will talk about my beer, which isn't a beer today. I'm drinking actually a local craft cider. I don't know if I've had this one every now and then I have a cider on the podcast, but I don't know if I've had this one. And this one is from a place just down the road from me called Sunday Cider. And it's called their Sunday Sesh. And it's delicious. What can I say? It's delicious cider. They make lots of wonderful ciders. Not sponsored by them or anything, but big shout out to them. They've got a fantastic spot to come and sit down and be outside on the summertime. It's just like it's perfection. So yeah, that's what I've been having.
Well, nice, man. Oh, well, I am not having a beer either, but I'm not having any alcoholic drink today. I actually, I'll just tell the story of what happened. So I wasn't even sure if I was going to have a beer today, but then in the morning I was like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm going to have a beer. And I drove to our little tiny town and they were closed. And I was like, I don't care enough to wait around for them to open. And so I decided to just come back and not have a beer today. And you know what? I mean, I think there's something about that. You don't have to do anything. You know what I mean? Like I know it's a tradition for us. And I kind of had a moment, where I felt a little obligated to do it. I was like, you know what? You don't have to do anything. You can do whatever you want. And that was very freeing for me just to kind of have that moment. So, I mean, look, next week I'll probably have a beer, but this week I didn't. And, and I do miss not having one, but at the same time, I think one thing that we can always do is we can always kind of just decide at any moment, you can go whatever you want. You don't have to do anything. Everything is this whole world is free form, really. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, if I can wrap this up on my end, let me just say this. Like I would say that what I've gotten from this conversation is that, the thing that gets you going in the first place, the thing that started you usually carries a lot of answers. So go back to that. That's something that I've always found really valuable. As a screenwriter, there's been many scripts that I've written that just started from a scene and I didn't really know what I was writing. I just had the scene in my mind. So I'm like, I'm going to write the scene. And then the scene was pretty good. And because that scene was interesting, I expanded upon the idea and I built a lot of the story around that scene. And so if I was kind of, deep into this story and many other scenes had been written and much more characters had been developed and whatever, what I would probably do is I would try to go back to that original scene and go like, what was interesting about that? What was fun about that? Why did you even write that scene in the first place? Because somewhere in there would probably have some answers that would help me with the rest of the story. And, I'll share this because this one sparks my mind because the thing is I recently stumbled across a scene that I had written and it was really, really good. And I forgot that I wrote it and I just put it on file and left it. But I reread it and I'm like, man, I want to make this into something. It just seems like these characters are eccentric and it's funny and this one character in particular. And so if I was going to develop that into a further story, I try to figure out what is it about this character that makes me want to write a whole movie about it. You know what I mean? I'd want to find that out because somewhere in there is probably the answer to what's actually meaningful for me. And just so I'm clear, I don't necessarily know what's meaningful about it yet, but I do know that there's something that's pulling me and it would be good for me to investigate that. And I think whenever you're going and doing something, you might not know, well, why am I doing this? Why does this matter? But try to figure out something that kind of got you going and investigate that because in there, the answer exists. You haven't found it yet, but I think it will help you wherever you are on your journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like go back to the seed. What was the initial seed of the thing that got the whole thing started? And it often contains the answer. Yeah, this has been a cool little conversation. I don't necessarily know what I have to say to close this one off on my end, but something that I thought about earlier in this conversation is like, in the film world, there's this and it's just kind of become an expression, but it's like cut to the chase. Cut to the chase. Get to the part that has meaning.
Yeah, well, I mean, can I add something? Like carry that
sure,
idea.
go for
That's
it.
interesting because cut to the chase. I mean, cut to the actual, like if it's an action movie or something, it's like cut to the point that's actually exciting and interesting. Like let's get to the stuff that actually is compelling to watch and is, whatever. And I think like you can get bogged down by some BS details. And then why don't you just get to the thing you actually want to do? Why don't you just get to that? Why don't you just get to the thing that we want to watch, that we want to read, that we want to experience? Why don't you just get to that? And then, and then you can figure it out, But I think there's something about this, cut to the chase idea that you're kind of on, because maybe there's another perspective on how to look at this, right? That you're stumbling upon here, because like maybe it's come from a North Star place, but maybe it's like just keep redirecting yourself to the thing that actually matters.
Yeah. I think that's really ultimately, and I think that it's something that we have to be very vigilant about. Maybe that's what I'll leave this one off, is that, like I do think it's something we have to be very, we almost have to practice it. We have to remind ourselves of it constantly because of how easy it is to lose that frame of reference. There are so many things that we're influenced by, especially today, that just make us kind of lose our way. And so just, keep coming back to that thing. Keep coming back to that initial point. What brought you to do this thing in the first place? Right? What was the first thing that inspired you, excited you, that lit you up, that did something to you that was kind of out of your control? I mean, that's really the only way that I know how to describe that feeling. And when you know that there's something there, is there's this feeling, there's this thing that it does to you that is out of your control, and come back to that thing. Keep coming back to that thing that you said, like, oh shit, right. Like it's just, like I love this one show called Chef's Table. And one of the fascinating things about anyone who's watched an episode of Chef's Table can probably understands this, but almost every single time it's like you have these incredible chefs who at the beginning of their careers, they went off and they studied at some great culinary school, usually in France. And they come back to their hometown, their home country, whatever it is, and they try and make French food. And it's just like, it's not working. It's not succeeding. They're not happy. And it ends up so often them coming back to them making the food that they grew up with, or them coming back to their own roots and doing something interesting with something that they ate their entire lives or something like that, so it's come back to that thing. There's joy, and there is meaning, and that's usually that North Star. So just keep reminding yourself of that thing. Write it up somewhere where you can see it, or have some way in which you are keeping the part that's meaningful, the thing that's actually the way. Find a way to actually act on the thing that is meaningful, and that it's always the thing that you're acting upon. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.